Intro.
This is the first episode of the video podcast for Unscripted. That's extremely important. Unscripted.
So do we lift up a figure when we say
Unscripted. That's very important. Any camera, I don't care what camera you look at. You don't have to look at the camera. Okay. First episode. This is going to be a podcast where we basically just talk about film, TV, analyze it, talk about what you like and what you don't like about it. And this episode is going to be a very broad subject. It's just science fiction. Sci-fi. Everybody loves sci-fi, so who wants to bring up a topic first?
Well, first, where do you draw the line of what is and isn't sci-fi?
Which means Erika had thing.
Well, actually, if you're looking at sci-fi versus fantasy, the settings are what sets them apart. Other than that, the storylines are really similar. How is Eragon, the book, not the movie?
Screw the movie.
Saphira does not grow up that fast. How does Eragon, the book, differ from Star Wars? I mean, it's almost exactly the same, right down to his uncle and aunt dying. Of course, his aunt died beforehand, but it's the same setup for the hero's journey starting out. So I think the futuristic setting is partly what defines sci-fi.
Well, I would also kind of argue the fact that it is more Star Wars. You can kind of envision it happening eventually. I can't really envision dragons just all of a sudden we have dragons now.
So where are my Ewoks?
Alien planets. Alien planets. It's really improbable that we're the only life form in the universe. So.
There's an equation for that.
Plus, I think sci-fi in its own is able to spread a lot farther than fantasy is in terms of setting, because sci-fi can help spread all the way out into space with all these different planets and new races that you can create, while fantasy just sort of sticks to medieval times, from what I've noticed, with dwarves, fairies, the same type of thing that you would see in any other fairy tale.
So do you guys remember the Artemis Fowl, I think it was called? What was
Yeah,
it?
that was the first one.
I read that.
That was like futuristic fantasy, but it also has sci-fi, so sometimes I think they can meet, and that's pretty
They're
interesting.
definitely like the most similar genres, I think.
Yeah.
Everything else sort of has very strict definitions, and then with sci-fi and fantasy, you can combine them at any time that you want.
I mean, what about zombies? Is that science fiction or is it fantasy?
I think it defines on
Realistic.
It depends on how you're doing it. Like with,
Well, okay, let's use Walking Dead for example.
yeah, it's like Walking Dead. It was a virus that spread, which could sort of go into sci-fi because like they had the guy in the CDC,
CDC, yeah.
who was actually working on a cure and working how it actually worked on the brain, and that's a very scientific aspect of it. So if you're working with how zombies were, then that's very sci-fi-esque.
But if you look at it as Haitian voodoo, which is where the idea of zombies first comes from.
History lesson.
Yeah, we're educational.
And
Then it
everyone
takes
tuned
on
out.
some.
Hey, Dr. Who
Then
started
it
as an
takes on
educational
very.
show.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Started as educational,
Jeez.
teaching kids science.
Yeah.
History at the same
Speaking
time.
of that,
That's
Doctor Who.
just-
No, back to zombies first. We'll do
Zombies, then Doctor Who.
No,
That can lead
no,
Doctor
you're
Who.
wearing a freaking Doctor Who.
I was
hat right
prepared.
Yeah, I
I'm
am.
wearing the shirt.
And
I was
also wearing a
prepared.
Star Wars shirt.
I have a star chart. Just.
now. I have nothing.
Matthew's blue
green
like the
shirt.
sky that you go into in sci-fi. Anyway, what were we talking about?
We're
Zombies?
talking about Walking Dead.
Erica was talking about Haitian voodoo. Is very
I was-
fantasy, like.
I was pretty much done with that, but it does have mysticism and things. So, what else did you want to say about zombies, Patrick?
No, I was just wondering what your stance would be on it and whether or not it would be science fiction or fantasy. I consider it more of a science fiction aspect. If you're approaching it like The Walking Dead, for example, where they're talking about how the virus will get into the brain and how everybody has this virus and how it affects the brain. And like, how can you make a cure? How can you stop this thing if everybody's
How would we
infected?
survive it if it happened in the future? Which is a lot of what sci-fi is, I think. They sort of go into, if this happened, how would our race prosper still?
And you do see that a lot with Doctor Who. I always remember the line from when the Daleks are when the Daleks are attacking in Bad Wolf episode and someone is watching from the space station. She just looks down and she's like, well, there goes Australia. Australia's gone dark. And I was just like, Jesus.
Yeah.
Poor Australia.
Which leads into Something I saw on the internet someone brought up was that if you're talking about like Star Trek TOS, the original series, it's very optimistic. Like it's basically just about let's discover this planet and this species and this plant and look what all these things can do. And today, sci-fi is more of just like here's this dark doom and gloom future and let's have a big giant space battle.
And why do you think that is?
Because space battles sell.
No, I mean, why do you think over time it's changed from just discovering things to a battle out in space and really dark and gloomy
I
atmospheres?
think if you look at it, like I brought up with the TOS, that was a very sort of dark time in that time period. So I think they were trying to be optimistic in that time. And now we're just sort of in a more world where we can sort of close off the bad things, and we can have fantasy bad things.
Or is it backwards and our worldviews have changed? Were we more optimistic in the 60s about moving forward? We knew that we couldn't stay where we were. That's why we had sit-ins and protests and the anti-war movement, hippies everywhere going,
Flower children.
yes, the flower children. Most violent humans towards vegetation ever recorded.
Yeah.
But today, do you think that we're thinking more, not so much, this is the end of days, but a more dismal outlook? Things are bad and we don't know when they're going to get better.
Yeah.
This is so cheerful. Are we all going
We're
to
so
die?
cheerful.
Yes, we are going to die someday. We're all
You
going
are
to stop
going
talking
to die
about this.
too.
Don't scare them.
It's only episode 1.
Matthew wanted to bring up Doctor Who. What did you want to talk
Oh,
about?
Doctor Who. Now, when Erika said you can take both sci-fi and fantasy and they can go hand in hand together, I think that perfectly describes Doctor Who. Because you have the time traveling and scientific elements of the Doctor, but then he's taking you into more fantasy-esque worlds, more so than sci-fi is. It's not really... Some worlds are futuristic, but a lot of them, as I see it, are more fantasy than sci-fi. So that, in turn, Doctor Who would be a perfect example of combining both genres together.
So I mean, you face some enemies like the Cybermen or the Daleks, where you see this overreaching effect of technology, which is what our world's kind of coming to, where technology is starting to push the boundaries of what is and isn't okay. But then you look at like the snowmen. They brought snowmen and made them vicious. I kind of see that's more of a fantasy-esque thing. But when you look at some of the episodes that have creatures such as the Daleks, the Cybermen, the more futuristic possible, I think more likely enemies, then I can kind of see the sci-fi aspect of it. Plus, it is really cool when they go back and forth. Like you go back and see history, like Victorian London, for example, 1942, the World War. They've done that, and I really enjoyed that because I'm kind of a history buff myself.
So it's historical fiction as well, so it's just, do you see all these genres?
Smash.
I mean, did the Doctor
Big,
really
wibbly,
marry
wobbly.
It's a good show, people.
It's a good show.
It is a good show.
Watch
You should
it.
watch it, except for my boyfriend. He won't watch it.
Really, watch it.
Okay.
No, he
Awkward
doesn't
level
like it.
rising.
The awkward level is rising.
But like Matthew brought up with like having Doctor Who be specifically sci-fi and fantasy, they do go into that a lot, where they sort of take something that they thought was fantasy and he sort of changes it into something scientific, which I think is pretty
Exactly.
cool to do.
They explain the werewolves with science to some extent.
Yeah.
They explain the siren with science. They explain the weeping angels with pure unadulterated terror.
Yeah, that's pure Moffat right there.
They explain the moon landing with spoilers.
Yes.
Spoilers.
Spoilers.
Oh,
Spoilers, dear.
I don't know why this bothered me, but I'm seeing recently in things like video games and even in TV and movies a lot more things like steampunk. Like say things are set in the 1930s, but everything's still futuristic and you have all these new weapons like the Order 1886, that's a new game that's coming out.
Mhm.
It's all steampunk. I'm not sure whether to consider that as sci-fi or as fantasy because they work so much supernatural elements into it, but then you have the futuristic advancements.
I guess it kind of, again, depends on how you define it, because if you're looking at magic as something that science can't explain yet, but you're employing this magic to help you with futuristic advancements, then to some extent you do understand how it works. And even today we have such a limited comprehension of how the world works, how the natural laws work, even with physics, which is supposed to make sense.
What is gravity?
It does.
Physics is
What is gravity?
Schrodinger's cat.
That was theoretical, everyone. Didn't actually kill a cat.
But could it be dead?
Could be. It could
Very
be
off
alive.
subject.
Maybe.
Let's see.
Oh, we wanted to talk about going to more fun, less serious part, aliens and alien planets, and what's your favorite like movies and TV shows?
Yeah.
You know, like your
man.
favorite species
Erica,
that you've
go
seen,
first.
favorite worlds
No.
you've seen.
Freaking tribbles.
Triple.
Oh no.
Triples are great. Going off Star Trek, because Star Trek is awesome, but the red planet that they had in Star Trek Into Darkness, I love that design. They did a really good job going into detail with it too.
And they had a really, really interesting story behind it too, didn't they just buy every utopia?
Yeah,
Painted all
they
the-
bought like
Yeah.
fake trees with the leaves on it and everything, and they just painted it all red. And like they set up this place outside on a sort of trailer place, and they stuck all the trees there, and they had people run through there. And it was pretty cool to watch.
It does sound really cool. Can I have one of those?
What
Can that be my Christmas present?
On
on
a
a
tree.
red tree?
No, I
You
want a
want a
forest.
You want
A
a
red
You want
forest.
a red
red
planet.
forest.
Yes. Get me one of those.
Why don't you just move to Mars then? And
Mars
start
has a tree.
planting your red trees.
Because it's so boring there.
Don't drink the water.
God, that episode.
Okay, what's other ones besides Star Trek?
Even though I hate the Star Wars prequels, if you like them, then you should be burned.
Hey, Matthew, we do not condemn people.
Dennis' favorite character is Jar Jar Binks.
Sorry. But I really liked, what's the name of that city where it's like the Cloud City where you
Oh, I know what you're
have
talking
the
about, yeah.
large buildings and they're like towering above the clouds. And everything,
Yeah,
it's sort of like the Jetsons.
Are
I
you
think it's
ta-
called
are you
Cloud
talking about
City.
So it literally is called Cloud City.
Lando's city in the...
Cloud City was an
Yep,
outpost.
that, it's pretty much that.
It's Cloud City on the planet Besman.
But
But everything is, I really liked the way that they set it up because, I mean, you can clearly tell sci-fi, but yet the way that it's built and the way that the city is run, it has a magical element to it, which I don't think any sci-fi is able to actually master.
And it's really aesthetically beautiful too. I mean, just looking at it, it's really... I would go on vacation.
Sure.
Just saying.
If the buildings
It's where everybody
fall.
betrays you and
Yeah.
sell you to bounty hunters.
Yeah,
Um,
that too. Thanks, Lando.
I think what, like, I'm gonna kind of actually branch off of Star Wars a little bit. I really do love the Wookiees. They were honestly probably my all-time favorite non-human species. Wookiees are amazing, and then they're
But
not technically
Ewoks.
related to Ewoks.
Ewok, Erika loves them.
I'm sorry, I've just been wondering for the past few years what a grilled Ewok would taste
Yeah,
like. The only
Erika's extremely morbid. Sometimes we just pretend she doesn't say things and move on with our lives. Is there any others?
The only reason I asked about the Ewoks is because it kind of grosses you out, which is
It's like a freaking Wookiee family portrait.
it's so cute. Oh yeah, there's Uncle Jeb.
It's gonna be really
We don't
weird to
talk
look at
about
this
Uncle
picture.
Jeb very much.
Okay.
Or football huddle.
The football. It's a team portrait.
Yep.
It's a team portrait. The team portrait.
There you
Not
go.
team
What's
portrait.
your website?
Portrait. Speaking of which, Portal.
Portal.
Well, it's not technically film, but yeah, I would technically love to talk about that because
You would
that's science.
technically love to
Sci-
talk about it?
Sci-fi.
I would technically
I would
love
love
to
it.
talk about it.
You can talk about it.
Sci-fi. It's like
There's directors
one of
and
the
there's-
best sci-fi games, and yet it's so simple.
Simplicity is definitely something that is good to like include usually, but like there's also room for complexity, like we said with the Red Planet. They built like a whole story and everything for it.
I think Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is in its own way really complex, and that's probably my favorite sci-fi story just because it takes and advances them to a, well, I guess universal scale. You start off with Arthur Dent, who's just like, okay, my house is going to be destroyed to make room for a road, and I'm really upset, and everyone is just saying, hey, you can get another house, you're fine. And then we can see the irony of that when the Vogons come in and just say, oh, well, you can certainly go get another planet even though you have no way to leave this one, so you're going to be fine. And also, it's just so off the wall British.
So long and thanks for the fish.
I love it. So long and thanks for all the fish.
I still need to read that book.
Broadway.
I never finished it.
I haven't finished it.
Coming up next, Erika is saying too much and her voice hurts right now.
Okay, anybody else have favorite sci-fi stories, movies?
Well, I'd kind of like to
shows?
actually go back to Portal for a
Portal?
minute, because I do,
Potato lettuce.
potatoes.
So,
It is really simple because it's you're just a test subject really. They don't really complicate the story. It's pretty straightforward, it's linear. And the elements of it are really simple. You just go through each level to try to get out. But there's a certain sense of beauty with it. The simplicity really does kind of create a game that is worth playing. I've played Portal, the first one, at least 3 times and beaten it. And I've worked on 2, both single player and co-op, a couple times. And with the simplicity, it really does make something really fun to play.
In any case, there's kind of someone behind the camera. If you come in here, we will skin you and make you into
No,
shapes.
you can come in. What?
Are you guys almost done?
Yeah, almost done.
Partial.
Okay.
I'm practicing presenting a
Okay.
song to Germany from
Alright.
this every project, so.
Alright.
let me know when you're
Sorry, bro.
Okay.
a couple more minutes left, I suppose.
Yeah, anything you want to like throw in right now?
Bioshock.
What?
Bioshock.
Bioshock?
Bioshock.
Oh, well, like
Video
with the-
games
Steam.
section of the podcast.
Hi, video game section. I'm sorry. The
Oh,
only thing I
Bioshock.
can think of when I think sci-fi is either Star
Yeah, I thought about
Wars,
that too when I
Star
was thinking
Trek.
about when you were talking about
Portal.
the steampunk stuff. I thought Bioshock.
Mhm.
Because it is really interesting to think about, like, oh, well, we could create a city at the bottom of the ocean, or all the way in the stars. I mean, really, it's
It's sort of like the 2 extremes of setting because there's
Well, yeah.
sci-fi goes into space and then there's sci-fi that goes underwater.
Yeah.
Something I like about sci-fi is that you're able to take social commentary to extremes. There's a movie that came out recently, World's End, and
Yeah.
it's just commentary with Simon
Pegg.
Yes, and Nick Frost, about how homogenous our culture is becoming to the point where conformity seems like something you have to do to survive. And I really loved how that examined social issues in a way that was not only hilarious and done through the lens of a bunch of drunk people,
Joke people.
but it also used sci-fi to make its point, and I really enjoyed that, and I love that we're able to do that through stories.
Yeah, I love that too about sci-fi, which is why Star Trek is like one of my favorite things in the world because they do address a lot of that. That's like their pure purpose in the actual show is just do that in a way that you can't really pick up on, but if you're looking for it, you know it's there.
Right.
She has a cardboard cutout of bones.
I do, it's great.
It is.
Speaking of that,
Yes.
I don't remember the phone.
That's a phone, don't panic.
I don't remember specifically what the movie was. I think it came out a little while ago. It was one where people who were healthy were sent to like this really big space station.
Oh yeah,
And then the rest of them were stuck on the planet.
Ooh,
Like
Elysium.
Jodie Foster,
Elysium.
Matt Damon, yeah, it was
Elysium?
It was Elysium, yeah.
Yeah.
That
Jodie
to me, sci-fi also shows how desperate humans can become when they're pushed to their absolute limits.
Yeah.
Because if we bring in what we were talking about before with all the games and the shows that we had talked about, at some point, someone is wanting to use that technology to either better themselves or destroy something else. And in doing so, they're going to have to leave everything else behind that they find obsolete or unworthy. And so if you take the humans down on Earth, they're considered unworthy while the rich and the powerful just rise up into space. So,
I am Jesus.
Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
Jesus.
Jesus! But that's what I picked up on from Elysium, at least.
I've noticed in a lot of sci-fi, they typically address like the overreaching power of technology. I notice that a lot. I mean, I kind of get that feel from Doctor Who, for example, with the Cybermen. It's that you're going to keep pushing until eventually you're trying to perfect your race with technology and you become this heartless creature.
Genetic modification of Daleks.
And then there's also things like WALL-E, too.
Wow.
Where they talk about how technology is kind of hurting the human race. It's not actually helping it. To eventually the point where everybody is going to be so obsessed with technology that the human race is
You are
literally
that
living
one.
in a chair that floats and moves, and you can talk to people even if they're sitting right next to you on a computer screen.
Which I think goes back to what we started talking about with the optimism, pessimism. Back then, they didn't have all technology in it, so it was sort of, if we have more technology, we'll be this awesome, great people. And now we have a lot of technology, and we're realizing that if we keep going with that technology, it's gonna turn into this big space battle in the sky.
And we're just scared that it is going to hurt
Yeah.
us. So,
So, any last comments now? Because we gotta wrap up.
Mega Man.
it sounds more like,
Okay.
Robots.
Robots.
Robots, yeah.
If you open Matthew's jacket, he disappears.
Yeah, Matthew broke the rules.
Let's.
Matthew
Which,
Broderick.
by the way, reminds me, we didn't do introduction, so if you want to go down the line, because we were irresponsible, did not introduce ourselves, so we're going to introduce it before we leave.
Okay, Danet, your show.
Matthew.
Your show,
Yep.
you start.
Okay, I'm Danet. Hi. Yay, me. I run the show.
Kirk.
Kirk.
Hi.
Captain Kirk. Hi,
She's
my
not
name.
Captain Kirk, too.
No, actually, I don't wish. Hi, I'm Erika. I already regret some of the things I've said.
You want to do a
God help
self-plug,
me.
Erika? You want to do a self-plug?
Hi, I'm Matt, and I regret none of the things I've said.
I regret nothing.
Okay.
My name is Fluttershy.
Yeah, it's also
And that's
Fluttershy.
when we cut the video.
Then that's
There we go.
the first episode of Unscripted. Yay.